Greetings of the day, everyone. I'm privileged to welcome you all in the third edition of Orange City Literature Festival, organized by SGR Knowledge Foundation in association with GH Raisoni University, powered by Raisoni Group of Institutions. I'm Yash Dikshit, delighted to be your anchor for today's session. Always a Foreigner, a remarkable story of an Indian, by Miss Ashwini Devare in conversation with RJ Nisha. Miss Ashwini Devare is an award-winning author and broadcast journalist. Ashwini ma'am has worked in television news for 15 years before turning to full-time writing. She was an on-air reporter and producer for BBC's Asia's Business Report in Singapore and a presenter for CNBC's Asia in mid-90s when the channel first entered the Indian market. Ashwini ma'am's latest book, Always a Foreigner, a memoir, is a coming-age of memoir that chronicles her nomadic journey through 6 countries against the backdrop of historic political events. It was previously published as Lost at 15, Found at 50, was shortlisted for the Singapore Literature Prize 2020, and won the Singapore Literature Prize Reader's Favorite Book Award 2020. Her first book, Batik Rain, was a collection of short stories that explored the theme of displacement and cross-cultural conflicts. Miss Ashwini Devare has a master's degree in broadcast journalism and American from American University in Washington, D.C. She has 2 sons, one who is studying chemistry and other a budding filmmaker. When Ashwini ma'am isn't writing, she is either reading or walking. It's an honor to have you with us, Miss Ashwini Devare. And this
Thank
gets even more delightful as we have RJ Nisha, who will be in conversation with her as the moderator. City's favorite radio jock believes that she may be imperfect, but she is perfectly herself. RJ Nisha has been awarded the Best Jock of the City and the Best Female Jock of Maharashtra by Big FM, but she feels awarded the day she gets a message or call which says, Nisha, you bring a smile to my face every morning. She follows the mantra that you live only once, but if you do it right, once is enough though. From being the best orator to winning a beauty pageant, national debater to trainer, she has tried her hands on all. It's a pleasure to have your presence, RJ Nisha. Also, before moving ahead, I would like to take a moment and acknowledge the support of ELF Publication as their association is valuable to OCLF. Now, my dear audience, you are about to experience a conversation between two very dynamic individuals. So, without skipping a moment, let's invite RJ Nisha to lead us ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Yash, for this beautiful introduction of both of the beautiful ladies around you right now. And good morning, Ashwini ji. How are you doing today morning?
I'm doing very well and excited to be part of the festival. Thank you both so much for the introductions.
Ashwini ji, looking by you, we can really not make out that you have 2 sons and that too one pursuing filmmaking and the other chemistry. It's always like, I would love to borrow that line from the ad. Ki, is twacha ka raaz kya hai? Is it reading or is it writing?
It's just being an empty nester that they have both found their ways. They have flown out of the nest. One has discovered his love for films. The other has discovered his love for chemistry. So I feel mera job maine kar liya hai as a mom.
How sweet. So, Ashwini ji, you are now a mom. You are an author. You were a person who knew what is journalism all about. And the beauty about your being a childhood was that you had an opportunity to travel around many places, even though even it was not your choice. But you had the chance to do so. When you see the upbringing between your parents and the way you're upbringing your kids, do you find any difference and something which you would love to pen down in the coming years?
Oh, good question. My upbringing was nomadic. I was on wheels from the time I was born, uh, in contrast to my parents who grew up in Pune, and that's my hometown. Very proud to say that. And my mother actually her parents were from Nagpur. So I have connections with both cities. So they were from small town India. And so they grew up, in a very different environment from what they raised me in, of course. But the way they adapted to this life was actually so inspirational to me that one of the reasons I wrote this book, Always a Foreigner, was basically also to give a tribute to my parents, because from where they came from to what they, their optimism to embrace everything that was new and dynamic. They were always so excited about and curious. their curiosity, it really inspired me. And that's a message I always give to people is don't lose your curiosity ever. And even in their 70s, they're still as enthusiastic and curious about new things. So, these are some of the reasons I said I must write about, their lives. In the early chapters of the book, it's about their lives, how they went from Pune to Moscow, which is where I was born, and how they adapted, constantly adjusting. And I think that's something it's a theme even for many of us today, where the mobility, the constant changes that we all face, and how we deal with change is very important.
So, you have this kind of a benefit that I must say that if you are born abroad or even if you're brought up abroad, you tend to be more Indian than what you actually are when you live in the country. Because you being you had the privilege of being an IFS, officer's daughter. So you had the embassy kind of a flavor where you had special day celebrations, meeting different kind of people from different cultures of India, and being truly Indian in those times. You feel that part what is there in the celebrations, what is there in the foreign countries of being a true Indian is somewhere missed about when we come back to our own land?
So, I was international, but yet, as you rightly said, very Desi at heart. So there's one chapter called Desi Girl. You cannot take out the Indian out of us. Anybody in the NRIs, the diaspora, the Indian remains very strong. You're right. But I think, of course, we were living in so many countries, but we were always in the Indian embassy compound. So it was under the shadow of the Indian flag. We were so patriotic. We always were representing our countries abroad from the time we were children, right? So in that sense, we were very Indian. But what was different was as I grew older, I really started appreciating this melting pot that I saw wherever I was, to be in a melting pot where constantly seeing so many different people, cultures, languages, the exposure was amazing and enriching. So I really do believe in this melting pot philosophy where I think outsiders enrich you and you enrich others. It's a give and take. So I think that was important for me. That's something that's shaped me. It's made me so mixed up in many ways. And, that's why this title, Always a Foreigner. I've always been a foreigner, and I always continue to remain a foreigner in many ways.
Absolutely true. So, when you meet different sorts of people, and being into my profession, I tend to interview many of the people like as lovely as you. So when I have a conversation, and mostly, mass journalism जिन्होंने किया है और journalists जो रह चुके हैं, they tend to become beautiful authors. So is it the journey of journalism that really inspires you that, okay, you've got so much to say that if it was not the television or the any other medium, let's pen down some beautiful books and give it to the people? Or is it that बस बहुत हो गया, अब हम लोगों की नहीं सुनने वाले, हम वो दिखाने वाले जो हम imagine करते हैं? What is that basically that inspires you guys to become an author?
I think for me personally, it was, of course, the journalism journey played a big role in writing my book, because I wanted to talk about all these countries I had lived in. But also, Nisha, I wanted to tell people that, growing up, nobody really knew IFS kya hai. What is diplomacy? It was so inaccessible, so far out there. Nobody really knew anything about it. All they thought was that it's really glamorous and it's really privileged and it's, oh my God, it's like an amazing life. That may be so for the diplomats who are living through that life, but for the families, it was pretty challenging in the 70s and the 80s. So I wanted to show that it's not only just glitz and glamour, it's also a lot of hardships for children, because we were put in environments that we were not comfortable in. There were no Indians there. It was disruptive, right? Every 2 years, you're going from Dhaka to Paris to Egypt to Ghana and you don't choose these countries. You're just following your parents because you're forced to. So that was really challenging. So I was always a new girl everywhere. Now, but the thing that was, of course, amazing and phenomenal that happened to me was all these countries we were in were going through historic changes. So, Moscow was Cold War. USA was Vietnam War. Sikkim became part of India when we were posted there. Every country it was like, flipping through pages of history. So I had to document that. I mean, it was just, when my father was posted in Moscow, Tashkent happened. Lal Bahadur Shastri passed away. It was historic development. It shook everybody up. So I had to document these things in my book. And that was the journalist in me that, had to do that. So journalism played a big role in writing this book. But having said that, there are many journalists who also pen fiction. I still have to do that. That's my next goal. So, but I think there's just so many ideas out there that. But for me, I tend to be very interested in historical fiction, geopolitics. So I think even my fiction will probably have elements of the journalism that I have experienced.
So I said that, everyone looks at just the cover of the page that you're an IFS officer, so you have a fantastic job. People want to be into that profession of yours. But I have a question, being a kid, as you said, how did you go through all of this? Because I'm sure no one wants to witness a war. Even I was in one of the countries where there was a war which just suddenly came up, and it was very difficult for me to actually see all the Indians that they had to leave the country and go immediately, where my father was still there at the airport helping out the people. So how is that for you, the experience altogether?
Yeah, good question. We were not in any war-torn country as such. There were many people I know who were. In many cases, the parents, then the children are usually kept back in India, or they go to boarding schools. They're not taken to these challenging environments. But having said that, we were there right at the time. For instance, South Korea, it was going through when we were there were demonstrations every day, students on the streets, because they were trying to overthrow the military rule, and students, thousands of them in the streets. There was tear gas. So we were experiencing all that from our windows. And while we didn't feel very unsafe, of course, there was the element that, you could be caught in all this, but it was just fascinating to observe that. And then you learn so much from these students who were just, till today, I have great admiration for South Korean students. It's something I saw with my own eyes, how determined they were, how nationalistic they were. And finally, they got what they wanted. They got democracy. So I think it was hugely inspirational for me as an 18-year-old watching that, something I'll never forget. And the Indian embassy was actually right opposite this university, the Hankook University, where thousands of students there was just like chaos going on. And I remember my father saying, maybe we need to shut the embassy. This is not safe. And every day we would be observing the situation. So these were very interesting times. At the time, it was tense. It was exciting as well. So there were situations like that where you were right in the middle of everything. So, but there are a lot of our officers who are posted in very tough places. And are in a very, very conflict-ridden areas. And I think at the time, for us, we were then, luckily, we were protected from that. We were put in boarding schools. I didn't go to boarding school, but a lot of IFS kids haven't traveled with their parents to these kinds of places. Yeah.
Very true, very true. So, Ashwini, what was that feeling when you wrote down your first book? You already, there's a saying that the first draft is basically called as the shitty draft in the journalism, that you just can't have the first copy absolutely perfect and going to the publisher and saying, dude, this is my book, can you get this published? It's fantastic. So how much time did it take for you to pen down your first book, and what kind of the draft number it was?
So, Nisha, the first book was fiction. It was short stories, because I think short stories seems less daunting than writing a novel or a memoir. So the first book was called Batik Rain. And it was tough because, I was a journalist. I was established as a journalist. But as an author, it was like starting all over again. So you're a nobody. So it's sort of like humbling, because you're brought down to earth and you realize, it's a tough world out there. And I submitted my manuscript. I didn't have that much luck. It was tough. It was really like, self-publishing almost for the first book. But you have to have faith in your own writing. I was happy with my stories. I struggled to get it published. It was not easy. I approached many publishers. I was turned down by many of them. And it's it can be very, very disappointing, the rejections that come your way after having done a career for so many years as a broadcast journalist. So it was a eye-opener. But, this is the thing. It's a journey. So the first book, it took me almost 4-5. First book was published in 2014. And by the time the second book came out, it was in 2019. There was a second book that I managed to get a publisher, and everything moved much more, seamlessly. And it worked. But it took 7 years. It didn't happen overnight. It was the second book then that went on to win an award and got a good publisher. But, that's what it's a reminder that everything is a journey. Nothing happens overnight. It requires a lot of hard work and requires you to, accept those rejections, however, horrible it is at the time when you open that email and say sorry, and you see all those, sorry, we couldn't take your manuscript, didn't work for us, blah, blah, blah.
That's true. But then, after writing down your first book, your second book was one of those which became one of the bestsellers also, and it was the talk of the town when you had a new upcoming, journalist writing and turning to be an author. How was that feeling for you? Like, when people came up to you, did they come up to you and say that, Ashwini, we never knew this part of yours? I mean, like, you write so well. Where were you for all these years? Or was it that they had an expression, we knew you had it in you somewhere, like, you just had to get it down?
No,
so what was that?
Good question. It's a very good question. I haven't been asked that before, but I think people sort of expected that I would write, because I think journalists are expected to produce something after a point. So I think that transition of going from a journalist to author was a little bit easier. People expected that I would do some kind of writing, but I think it's when journalists pen fiction that people sit back, and, oh, how did that happen? Journalists write fiction. That's a bit more of an adjustment for people. But a memoir is something journalists do have written in the past. It's easier. But having said, there are a lot of journalists, well-known journalists, George Orwell and Graham Greene. They were all journalists who became such famous authors of fiction. So yeah, I think fiction, non-fiction, as far as I'm concerned, writing is the same. You can write fiction, non-fiction, poetry, journalistic writing. As long as you are creative in your expression, it doesn't matter what kind of writing you're doing. You should be able to write many different genres as a writer. And as a kid, I used to write a lot of creative writing. I did a lot of creative writing. I used to write short stories, diaries, notebooks. So journalism became, attractive to me because of my travels. But writing was fundamentally always something I did right since I was a kid. And I would encourage people to do that, to just write. Sometimes it's so therapeutic to just write. There's so much bottled up inside you. You feel it's cathartic when you write. Let those floodgates open, just write. Forget about the publishing end. I often tell people who are writing, just forget about what's going to happen. If you write from your heart, it will resonate. It will. Just be true to yourself, be authentic, just write and see what happens. You have to take that chance.
Absolutely true. Actually, that reminds me that, when you meet people in the literature festival these days, there are many upcoming authors, or you could say, the budding artists who will actually want and publish it, or a person like you to answer that, do we really can take up writing as a kind of a profession? Does it pay you well? How many pages should be there for a book? What kind of a story should I write it? People only like romantic and erotic romance these days. Should I only pen down that? What you would like to say to all these people that, is it actually the number of words? Is it actually the kind of amount of money which you get? What is it all about when you become an author?
Well, I have to say, look, it's not going to earn you big bucks. It is not a career that you should embark on if, you're looking to make a lot of money, because it's not. Authors are not really paid well. Books are sold at very low prices. Of course, all that is there. But you're writing because you're passionate about it. You're writing because you have something to say. You have a story you want to share. Like I said earlier, you need to write because there's that passion in you, that voice in you. A filmmaker makes a film because he has that calling, right? He or she has that calling to tell the story to the world. That's how you have to feel about it. Word count, word count should not be the factor. When you have something that's just flowing out there, it can go to 200, 300 pages. 80,000 words, 100,000 words. Of course, in a fiction, to keep it interesting, it's challenging. It's not that easy as it's made out to be. Halfway through the book, you may not know which way the story is going. Where is the plot? What's happening to the characters? You have to make sure that you are interested in your story so that the reader will be too. And I'm finding that it's challenging when you're doing fiction, because you have to keep the story going. You have to keep the reader's interest, and the characters have to be well fleshed out. So it's not something you can just take on and say, I'll see how it goes. You have to be willing to put in all those hours, that effort that's required to write a book. It's like a job. It's a 9-to-5 job. You have to be prepared to put in all those hours and the discipline that's required. But yes, it's not something, I mean, a lot of people do other jobs and write, which probably is a sensible thing to do.
That's true. So when you say that you love writing a lot, and I'm sure you must be reading a lot, did you ever make a pen friend?
A pen friend.
Yeah.
You know, I grew up in an era that y'all won't remember. There was no Facebook. There was nothing, no way of communicating with anybody except through those letters. So, I had this friend who was we were posted in Geneva, and she was really sweet because we didn't speak the same language, but she was really nice to me, and we became friends despite the language barrier. But her name was Isabel. But after we said goodbye, and I knew I never would see her again, and I haven't. But for years, we would write to each other. It was very sweet, and that's something that's like a little memory from the past. It's just a little thing that sits with me whenever I think about my past. That we used to have these kinds of friends. So, with Facebook and all, we have thousands of friends, but no real friend, right?
True.
But with these pen friends, there was much more. It was less frivolous. It was something very nice. Yeah.
I did give you a moment of nostalgia right now.
You did. Absolutely did. I can visualize Isabel. She had this long braid of lovely golden hair. She reminded me of Heidi, that little character Heidi.
Uh-huh. So, is there any character whom you've met right now into your life that you've put him into your fiction characters, and you felt like this is the perfect person? I need to take the nuances and keep this into the book.
So the lady who inspired me greatly and who was there in my first collection of short stories, Batik Rain, was my great grandmother. Because Maharashtrian women have always inspired me because they were so educated, they were liberated. They come back. There's a whole lineage of these very dynamic women, and my great grandmother was one of them. Actually, she went to study in the U.S. with her husband. She did her PhD. This is in the 1940s. And I was completely amazed by her story. And, she used to cycle, she used to swim. You think about that in the 1950s. She was extremely well ahead of her time, so progressive in her thinking. Saroj Ai is how we remember her, Saroj Aji. And she died very young. She died in her late 20s, actually, and achieved so much in her 27, 28 years. So, my story is titled Saroj, and she continues to inspire me with all the things she did back then. And she definitely made it into the pages of my book. And it was one of my favorite stories, actually, in Batik Rain.
So, today it is the International Men's Day. Did you find any men into the foreign land whom you've actually penned down into your book?
Oh, maybe that's for the next book.
So we have a hint dropped here.
International Men's Day. I'm glad they're celebrating that as well.
At least we have a day for them reserved now, I should say.
Yes, absolutely.
Women have been appreciated and acknowledged everywhere right now. So men should have a day for them.
Yes, I'm sure my sons, I can see both my sons nodding vigorously because they're sick and tired of my feminist tirade. So this will really help them.
So one thing which you say that you're blessed with that helps you to have two generations reading your books, what would that be?
Sorry, what was I missed that.
Not an issue. It's like one thing, or then you should like a talent in you think that you have, or it's something which you're blessed with. You should say that when you write, you can actually connect two different generations altogether. You really feel that you have that in you, and if yes, how do you manage to do it?
I don't think I try hard. I think it's just happened. So the book, Always a Foreigner, the first several chapters is about me growing up. It was about me as a teenager and then growing up as a adolescent. And some of the problems that I faced are very similar to what people face today. I mean, adolescents, young people today have the same sort of angst, same sort of mental health issues, same sort of adjustment issues. If you're in the army or if you're in the services and you're moving around, it's the same thing, right? And it's even worse now in some ways because you have this whole social media layer of social media upon your lives, which makes it harder for people. So I often talk about this whole isolation that young people feel despite being so connected and being so hyper-connected. They still feel lonely. They feel that big void in their lives. Um, and I think that's something that I experienced as well. So, that coming of age story that I have in my book is similar, where you felt always, like I felt I was always sticking out. And as a teenager, you don't want to be conspicuous, you want to be invisible. And I was always in the spotlight because either I was brown skinned or I didn't speak the language, or for whatever reasons, I was right there like a fish in the fish bowl. And I hated that growing up. And I hated growing up, also not having people who looked like me around me. That was also tough.
Okay.
So yeah, so I think my message is also to people is, yeah, travel is great, and if you get the opportunity, you must travel. It opens up your minds. But there's also something to be said about growing up in one place, in one community, going to the same school, having the same friends. That grounding and the confidence it gives you is also something that can't be underestimated, because you grow up very confident about your identity, your sense of belonging. It keeps you very rooted. So I think these are things that, is something that people should also accept, that yes, I've grown up in one community, and it gives you that confidence, which I lacked growing up sometimes because I didn't have that stability. But at the same time, I think the upside of travel and of having experienced so many countries and people is that it just opened up my mind, and it made me less uh, I'm very open to influences, to experiences, to outside, to views, opinions. So I think people are becoming very, stuck in the echo chambers, and I think
Right.
that's this polarization that's happening. So I would really urge people to try to be open minded. Yeah, I think
That's good.
for our next generation, that's very important.
So, Ashwini, if I had to say that, you have been one of those persons who have lived the transitions of the media coming up. You've seen how it has been changing one form to the other, where a news was being given up in a very plain manner, where a person could just hear it across. Okay, this has happened. To getting to a place where it has been said that this has happened, and you are not aware of it, and you see. When you talk about that journalism and when you talk about that news, what do you say? Does it has to be subtle in the way it was before? Because as it say that time repeats itself, history repeats itself, so that momentum will come again. Or do you feel that no, this kind of a generation really feels that okay, the rich masala has to be added to produce a news and give it to us. So what would you say on this?
I think I would say what a trained journalist always believes in is balance. You got to have the balance. So on one end of the spectrum was very bland, boring news, which perhaps will not work with today's really insta generation, right? Everything's instant. But on the other end of the spectrum today, we just have so much noise that it's just drowning out the substance. And I think many people talk about it. Many people don't really like it, of course. I think it's not that everybody really loves what they see on the news and all the noise. So I think if you can strike that balance for journalism, it's very, very important, because we've got to bring it back in to the center. We've got to rein it back in. It's going either which way, and just the polarization, the opinions that are flying out. I mean, as journalists, we were trained never to disclose our opinions. That's my
Correct.
old world training as a journalist. It seems very old school now, but the fact is that you really are just there to tell the news as it happened, give the facts, and don't color it with your opinions. That just seems to have been thrown out the window. And people of my generation, when we studied journalism, it's very difficult to adapt to that. And I'm not necessarily, happy to embrace that either, because I really do think opinions should be reserved for the op-ed column in a newspaper. But as a reporter, you really have to balance it out, give attribution. I find most of the articles, sometimes when I read them, they don't attribute, they don't give context. We have to give context to what happened, give some background. And that's just lost in this whole this race, sensationalism. Yeah, television has become showbiz. It had already started becoming that way, and now it's a lot of mirch masala. But I think you do need a little bit of the mirch masala as well. So a little bit of the balance.
To strike a perfect balance. Absolutely. So when you sit down to write a book, so is that Ashwini goes down to a place to write a book where there's lots of people around her and she can just wander, look around people and look up to the characters and start writing? Or are you one of those persons who, likes to just go into that dim light, how we see that, बस वो एक ही जगह पर बैठे बस घंटों लिखे जा रहे हैं जो हमें दिखाया जाता है in the Bollywood movies and everything. So how do you like? What kind of a person is Ashwini, if you had to know?
I like both. I like the noise because I was used to a newsroom, and I like all the hustle bustle. I like the phones ringing. I like people chatting. I can still sit on at my desk and churn out my copy. Uh, but sometimes I think when it came to writing a book, I found quieter places easier with less distractions. So I do go to my desk, and I like it quiet. I don't listen to music. Like to go to so like a boring place, so there are not that many distractions. So I can focus on just what I have to do, because it's very easy to get distracted. The phone and WhatsApps can take up your whole day. I think that's the biggest challenge facing all of us, including young people. I don't know how they do it. They have multiple boxes open simultaneously. They're juggling so much. It's actually pretty commendable how they do it, and they still manage to do a good job with what they're doing. So that's fabulous, but it doesn't work for me.
So there is no part of it which says that कि नहीं यार इस दुनिया से ठीक है हम दूर ही ठीक है
हाँ जी,
हम
बिल्कुल.
pages में जा सके तो ज्यादा अच्छा. I love the time when we had actually pages. It was such a fascination that oh, your dad owns a pager and you would be the talk of the person. And the whole group was like, wow. And now
Yeah.
everyone has that phone, so you have no importance to it now.
No. But I think that this WhatsApp has been amazing for senior citizens. I see like parents' generation. I mean, wo matlab, they are obsessed with their WhatsApp groups, and they've reconnected with their college friends and universities or I mean, it's really opened up a whole new world for them. So उनके लिए loneliness नहीं है. I think हम लोगों के लिए ज़्यादा है.
ज़्यादा है. But as you said, earlier, कि लिखना जो है, when you start writing, it can be therapeutic also. And into the momentum of today's life, when we see, we really have so much going down. Even if we are on the phones and we keep juggling it between the different windows, we still have a window which is not connected to ourselves. So how would you like to say about that? Why is it important to know yourself, take out your own time and write out what is going inside you? Because that can be so healing also.
Absolutely. You've said it very correctly. What's wrong with some me time? We feel, oh, it's very selfish of us to want time for ourselves. It's okay to snatch those few minutes, hours for yourself, because if it makes you happy, you will radiate that happiness to others, especially if you have a family. But there's that whole feeling, oh, you've taken out time to do something you want to do. Oh, how can you, what about the others? There's so many emotions and responsibilities, especially for women. They find it difficult to get away. But I do think it's very, very important for your well-being to catch and snatch some moments of solitude. And when I mean solitude, if you have the luck to go to a park or any greenery, like nature, I find very therapeutic. Of course, it's easier said than done. Even for a young woman to go to a park, there's safety issues, there are all kinds of issues. But if you can snatch away an hour even in a day for yourself, whether it's reading quietly in a corner, reading has almost become, I mean, I feel very sad, but people just don't have the time to read a book. So if it's an audio book, if you're going for a walk, just find that 1 hour to start with for yourself. Whether it's going for a walk, reading a book, listening to some music, doing a painting, all these things that will generate some positivity in you, especially in these times, is very important, especially for young people as well.
So there's a beautiful thing when people say that, loneliness, and there is one word is solitude. And, it's always been misinterpreted by people. How would you like to define it for us? What do you mean when one says that, you are in the loneliness, and one says that you're in the solitude?
I love solitude. I've always loved it. It's something that's given me so much peace. Just to get time for myself, I enjoy it thoroughly. I just spent a few weeks recently with my son, and he would go to work, and I had the day to myself. And not for a second did I get bored. It was almost magical to have that time with him. But the whole day I had to myself, which is, I mean, in this day and age, it just seems like a luxury. But it allowed me to think, it allowed me to reflect, it allowed me to value things and cherish things which otherwise in our day-to-day routines You never get that chance. You don't get a chance to value people, to reach out to people whom you may not have spoken to in a while. These are important things, because in this rush of life, we don't want to you don't want to be regretting anything. You want to be able to spend time with people who matter to you, who you would like to you would like to reach out to, but you just don't get the time. So solitude is something I treasure. It allows you to recharge.
Absolutely true. So when you say that your book says it, always a foreigner's life. So what are the qualities which you say that you are perfect person to actually give this title and embracing every line of it?
Like I said, the title was the easiest thing for me, because this is what I lived. I lived this title from the minute I was born. So I was born in Moscow. I was the only Indian baby in that entire communist hospital. And nobody had ever seen a brown skinned baby with black hair. So my mother said they would all come and peer at me and say, "Oh my God, so much hair, so much hair." And I became a talking point in that hospital ward, because nobody had seen anything like that. Of course, for my mother, it was very stressful. She's a vegetarian; she couldn't get food that she wanted. But I was a foreigner from the time I was born. Um, in every country that I went to, I was a foreigner. And the reason there's one chapter in here called Desi Girl. So I thought when I was 15, I'm coming back. We were posted back to Delhi. I thought, oh, wow, I'm going to come back to India. I'm coming back home. This is where I belong. And I came back to Pune, and I felt like such a foreigner, because, I was everything was so different. I came back in ninth standard, and the curriculum was so rigorous. Before that, I'd been in a small school, in a makeshift school in Burma, where there was like 10 of us in a class, because there was no proper schools for me. And then suddenly I come to this huge school where everybody's studying so hard, and I was failing all my tests, and I looked so different. I sounded different. I said, "Oh my goodness, what has happened?" But within a few months, I adjusted, and I made friends, and I suddenly, that whole feeling of foreignness started to whittle away. And for the first time in my life, I actually felt like I belonged somewhere. And I've spent my whole life abroad, but those 5 years that I spent in India, it's like this umbilical cord I had with India, and it just brought me back to my roots and the sense of belonging I had. So it was very, very, a very valuable 5 years of my life, where I reconnected, and I started feeling less of a foreigner after coming to India.
So wasn't there anybody who came down with a proposal of saying that, Ashwini, you are actually a foreigner, but you are so desi and you're the perfect match for me?
Well, yeah, actually, my publisher said Desi Girl is a great title for this chapter, because everything you're saying is sounding so desi, and you're sounding so nostalgic, and there's nothing foreign about you, really. But in my head, of course, I had so many different ideas, and there was a big mismatch between how I, felt at the time. And even today, I mean, it's, I'm still looking to find this sense of belonging. I'm still not really sure where I belong. But now I've stopped stressing about it. Every place that makes me feel happy is home for me. And I'm lucky I have so many homes. I have my sister's home. She lives in the US. I have my parents' home in Delhi, my grandmother's home in Pune. And so I feel blessed that, home doesn't have to be a permanent thing anymore. It can just be abstract. It's just a place where you feel happy, where you feel loved.
So if I had to ask Ashwini as a mother, Ashwini as a wife, Ashwini as an author, Ashwini as a journalist, what is the best thing which she chooses for herself?
That's the question. You, as a woman, you know how that is. You can't answer that. It's every moment you're wearing a different hat. So I think it's how you balance out all these hats. I think your childhood will always be special for you, as for anyone. The childhood years and what shaped you as a child and how you became a young person, those years will always be very, very special. So yes, as a young, ambitious young woman who wanted to make a mark in the world, and who became a journalist, that is a very important part of my life, which I can't, I can't gloss over that, because it's really, really shaped me into who I am. And then the transition to motherhood is challenging for many moms, and had to deal with that as well, with all the challenges and of course the joys that come with it. And now the next phase, and I'm happy to reveal that I'm over 50, because this is the next innings, right? You don't know what life holds ahead. You just hope, like I said earlier, that you have healthy innings, you have happy innings, and I feel like I connect a lot more now to young people, maybe because my kids are in their early 20s and they're embarking on their new journeys of learning and knowledge. And I say that to young people wherever I meet them. Value every lesson, every exam, every class lecture, because these years will never come back again. And knowledge will empower you like nothing else can. Read as much as you can, learn as much as you can. Don't waste a single day, because when you step out into the world, it's that knowledge that will give you heads up over everything else. Not even money will match your knowledge. So try to absorb as much as you can. That's my message to young people out there. Don't waste a single day. It's just too precious.
So, was it that, when you entered into the phase of motherhood and you have beautiful two sons, so you could find some time in between them and, learning something from them and give it a thought that I'm going to be penning down this also. Yeah, ye experience is something all different, like what I have been growing up. So has that thought any moment come down to you?
Yeah, I think when I watch them growing up, you're so caught up in motherhood and domesticity and your day-to-day life, you sometimes forget there's some very special moments. So I would take notes. I would write some things down here and there, because later on these things you will never remember. So I'm really glad I did that, because I even wrote down some dialogues that caught my attention between my two sons sometimes. I said, did he really say that? Did he actually do that? So I took little bits and pieces of notes, which I now look back and I show it to them, and we have a good laugh. Some of these things did make it into the book as well. Some of their very interesting dialogues, full of curiosity. So yeah, they've made it back. They've made it into the book.
Do you remember any of those dialogues that you could share it with us?
Well, one dialogue I can't forget is my son must have been about when my first book came out in 2014. He was in middle school, and he said, "Mom, why do you write books?" Because he was already dabbling with film and getting very excited. He must have been 11 or something, and he said, "Why are you bothering writing books? By the time I grow up, there's going to be far more writers than readers. You know that, na?" I said. So I said, look, I can't do all this video and all this. But he was trying to convince me that I should go digital and that I should actually do, videos and film. And he thought that writing was a waste of time. But I thought his words were quite, I mean, he was quite accurate, because he thinks there's going to be far too many people who are going to write and far too few people who are going to read.
That's true. So what do you still prefer? Having an audiobook or a kind of a Kindle into your hand, or you still love the smell of the paper and love reading those books and keeping them into the shelf with bookmarks inside it or some memories inside? What is your choice?
I've sort of adapted to Kindle now. I like my books. And what I've decided is to keep the books that really mean a lot to me. So my classics and the books that have some memories or that are very special to me, I keep those books as books. But I have now switched to Kindle otherwise, because I just find it easier. It allows me to read more when I'm, on Kindle. So yeah, I've tried to kind of bridge that, the sentimental attachment to books.
But once you are a person who loves books, you really can't get away with it. Like it's hard for me to even say, when someone tells me or my mom tells me, "Ye kab khali hone wala hai? Can I use this place for anything else?" I'll tell you, I'll manage it out, but that never can get go out of me. I'm like, I need those books there to take me. These are my friends. You can't take them away just from me.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. Have to hang on to some of them at least, huh? One bookshelf you must keep.
है ना? एक की permission मिल जाएगी for the time being.
Yes.
So, Ashwini, when I have to say that when you write your book, one thing which has been there that you will always continue writing, what will that? One particular thing which any book, if we find out, we will find this trait of Ashwini has to be in this book.
Good question. I like describing nature. in my books. So, and I try to curtail myself because I can get carried away. So I have to really, really censor myself when I'm writing long descriptions of meadows or forests or the Himalayas or so. Yeah, you will find nature descriptions in all my books because that's something that inspires me a lot. And you might find references to music or because I've grown up, my mother's a classical singer, and we grew up listening to a lot of Bollywood music. And in fact, each chapter in my book is associated with a particular song of that era. So,
Oh, that's interesting.
yeah.
That the song of the era is also going to be there. That's something which we would definitely want to look up to.
So Avara, for instance, the first chapter was Avara because we were in Russia, and Raj Kapoor was hugely popular back then.
Very popular then.
Yeah.
So one thing, the last thing which I had to ask you is, what keeps you going when you say, is it the people or is it your books?
What keeps me going? Oh, definitely the people. Yeah. I like to collect people because I like friends, a community of people. Oh, I can't do without them. I treasure them. I treasure my friends. I treasure my family. I treasure strangers who've said nice things to me or who've made an impact or spoken to me at a book festival or at a bookstore. I think things like that, little nuggets and little bits and pieces of people. Family is very important to me. My extended family.
One
Even my
beautiful
kids.
message that you still remember someone who came up to you after they read your books.
In fact, it was after Batik Rain when the one chapter was about my great grandmother Saroj. And there was a lady who must have been in her 80s or 90s who came up to me, and we both, literally cried a little bit because she said, I knew Saroj and she was a friend of mine. And when she died, I was completely devastated because they were together in college. So it was so special. She was at the Pune Literary Festival where I had launched Batik Rain, and she read the book and she didn't know that there was a story in it about Saroj. So when she came and spoke to me, and she came with her walking stick, and she was an old, an elderly lady, it was really, it was very, very touching.
I'm sure that must have been the most emotional moment for you at that time. So one thing that you would say regarding us right now.
I wish we could have done this in person, and I wish we could have been sitting there together at a panel at the festival, and I wish I could be in Nagpur.
You're always welcome. You're always welcome. The day you want to say that you want to have another home to come down to, please come down. You have beautiful places here again.
Wonderful. I haven't been to Nagpur in years, and I only have memories of it because of my mom and her family. So it's a visit that's long overdue. I can't wait to come.
So then we should not be waiting for it now. We're going to be looking forward for you to come down to the city of oranges again.
Sounds lovely.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ashwini. Over to you, Yash.
Okay. So at the outlast, I would like to thank Ms. Ashwini Devare and RJ Nisha for joining us today. We wish to get to hear you both again and equally enlightened as we all are today. And for my dear massive audience, I'm sure that after witnessing this conversation, you all are taking an enriched version of yourself as just I will. Thank you for joining us today. Until I see you for the next time, this is Yash Dikshit signing off.
Thank you.
beyond.